Genesis 6, it actually talks about the angels that fell from heaven that mated with the humans, and they also mated with animals. And so it talks about the blending of our genetics and the blending of corruption. I mean, this is the reason why God flooded the earth.
But then what do you say about the archaeological record that actually doesn't show that change in genetics, say 100,000 years ago?
Oh.
So did the garden, so then the question is, did the Garden of Eden come before 100,000 years, or is the Garden of Eden time frame wrong? Because those are just my honest questions, is that I do have the belief that the planet is older than 6,000 years.
Yeah, so there's no archaeological evidence that sort of suggests that it's older, but there is people's assumption, and it's almost like, it is a really good thing. It's like, what was Jesus' first miracle? He turned water into wine. What is wine? It's an old aged drink, right? Supposedly, this is what we would assume, right? So like he made something new old instantly. So it's almost like, why would you assume that God couldn't just make the earth old?
But then my question is, why would he do that? Why would he throw curveballs at us?
Well, because it's irrelevant of why. I mean, that's God's way. You know what I mean? Like,
see, and that's my thing, is that I just can't. Like, you can say that, but then it goes back to the assertion would be that I think that you're arguing from what you already want to believe, and then you're willing to go back and bend things and twist them to fit that belief versus being an objective person and saying, okay, am I really okay with that? Does that really make sense? And one of the examples I'll bring up, because I know you said you want to talk about this, is the original creation stories. Yeah. So my understanding of the archaeological record is that the Jewish religion was completely and totally different before 587 BC.
The Jewish religion was very different. In fact, the Jewish religion today is more akin to witchcraft than it was prior.
Wow. Yeah. So, yeah, but what I'm saying, what I'm saying is there was no mention of Adam and Eve. There was no mention of the Garden of Eden before 587 BC. They came in contact with these stories. BC. That's when King Nebuchadnezzar subjected the Israeli people into captivity and brought them into Babylon. And the Jewish scholars believed that it was Enlil Jehovah that gave power to King Nebuchadnezzar to conquer them and subject them. So they came in contact with the original stories where Enki the Wise, the snake wrapped around the tree, was the true benefactor of mankind. And he wanted mankind to be elevated to the status of a god. And so this is why he truthfully, in the original story, told Eve, partake of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and ye shall be as gods. Yeah. And so they changed the story so that they made what you believe to be the devil to be the liar, and they made Enlil Jehovah, who was actually the liar in the original story, they made him to be the benefactor of mankind. So when these documents were discovered in 1855, it like sent a lot of turmoil through the Christian community. And there was a pastor, and his response was, the devil put these tablets in the desert to test your faith. And that's the kind of mental gymnastics where it's just, to me, if you are being objective and you're not emotionally attached to this religion for whatever reasons, you just can't accept that. And it's, I can see some of the arguments that people make, and I can say, okay, well, I can kind of agree with that conclusion, but then there's other things that I also know to be true. And in order to make all of these things true, the mental gymnastics that you have to jump through, I'm just not okay with that. And
so what are the tablets called that you're referring to? You're talking to the Anunnaki tablets? Or you're talking to, what are
they were building a railroad through the desert in Iraq in 1855, and it was very, very flat. And they came across this mound, and they didn't know that if it was, a dune or whatnot. So they did testing to see if they could go over top of it, or if they had to go through it. And so it was soft. So they said, okay, we have to go through it. So they started excavating, and they started finding all of these tablets. And they said, hey, this
tablets, or what were they named?
Archaeological.
What were they named?
I don't know the original name of the tablets. I read this through Genesis of the Grail Kings. That's what I'm telling you. That was Lawrence.
This is like Billy Carson knowledge, and Billy Carson talks a lot about this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
Which a lot of those tablets and those things were proven to be false in a lot of situations. So the tablets that you're talking about, they have since tested and determined that some of these things were false, and some of these things
false in what way? They weren't as
old at all, and they were recent creations. They determined some of them. Okay. And so some of them were also determined that, and I think Billy Carson gets kind of some of that stuff actually got kind of exposed in some regard. But
what's the other guy, Stitchner or something? He was
Westhoff.
Westhoff was one of them.
No, there's Stitchner or Sitchner or something.
Zachariah Sitchner.
Yeah, he was one of the original ones. Yeah,
and he was also a fraud, and he was actually caught lying in several situations. So a lot of that stuff came from exaggerated, because he also assumed that he interpreted the tablets, not just gave the knowledge. So his interpretation of those tablets is completely bogus, because no one knows. And it's actually, Zachariah Sitchin is actually one of the culprits who they determined discovered some of this stuff and created it. And it's actually more plausible that he was influenced by a demon, in my opinion. Way more plausible.
But what would you say about this, though? And this is something that I have searched this far and wide. Christians believe that the Jewish people have had the Old Testament for 5,000 years, that it was given, to Moses on Mount Sinai, on and on and on, and, the original books of the Torah.
Questionable, but okay. Some of it.
So to me, it's, if you look at the Old Testament, you have the Torah, which is the first 5 books.
The Old Testament was written by multiple people. In fact, the Old Testament wasn't even written by Moses. In fact, there's a lot of assumptions that we assume Moses wrote it, but he actually refers to himself as the most humble person in the world, which is kind of weird if you're a humble guy to refer to yourself. So it's pretty obvious he didn't write it.
So this is my understanding of Jewish religion in the Old Testament, and then
the common understanding is probably not the correct one.
Well, so I'm going to tell you my understanding. You can tell me if you agree or not. So before 587 BC. The Jewish people were originally, they were polytheists. They believed and worshipped many different gods, and then they.
Where does that come? Where's that understanding?
Archaeological record.
Okay, so we know that we've dug up. I don't know if you know this, but you can actually dig up. They've dug up a lot of synagogues, and we've dug them up. And under the floor, they have found synagogues that have the zodiac on them, which alludes to polytheistic worship, I would assume. But these synagogues were actually. There's a time biblically where the so-called Jew that we talk about was actually taken over, and it's biblically, you can point to it in 2 Kings. It actually talks about they were taken over by a race of these polytheistic people that claimed to be Jews but were not. And it actually shows it. And those are the ones that took over all the regions. And it says that they worshiped God, Yahweh, but they secretly worshiped their gods. It actually says that in the Bible.
So this is my understanding of the Bible.
Yeah.
587 BC, Jewish people at that point, they worshiped one God, but they did believe and they acknowledged other gods. King Nebuchadnezzar conquered the Israeli people, made the majority of the Jewish people go to Babylon. This is where they came in contact with the Babylonian versions of what were ultimately Sumerian creation stories, Adam and Eve, Noah, the flood, all of those kinds of things. It was their belief that Enlil Jehovah had given power to King Nebuchadnezzar to conquer them. So it was their intention to rewrite these stories so that Enlil Jehovah would be seen as the one true God, and that the Jewish people would only worship Enlil Jehovah, the one true God. The Persian Empire came in, I think it was Xerxes I, came in and conquered Babylon and allowed the Jewish people to go back to Israel. And so this is what is, I believe, referred to as the part of the Old Testament. It's like the second book of prophets, where it talks about the Jewish people have strayed from the one, true religion and whatnot. And so if you understand the historical context, it makes perfect sense why they're saying this. And the reason why they're saying this is because you had an entire generation of Jews that were raised in Babylon under the new Jewish religion, and they were released and they were able to go back to Israel. Now, I think it was about 10% of the population was actually able to stay in Israel. So these were the original Jews who had the original Jewish religion, and you had these people coming back from Babylon who were the Babylonian Jewish people, and they had this new religion. And they were sitting there looking at the Babylonian Jews going, what the fuck are you talking about?
Wherever you guys are watching this show, I would truly appreciate it if you follow or subscribe. It helps a lot with the algorithm. It helps us get bigger and better guests, and it helps us grow the team. Truly means a lot. Thank you guys for supporting, and here's the episode.